You're watching the Oxygenaddict Triathlon Podcast, and every week we're going to bring you an episode of this show to help motivate and inspire you. And what a show to kick off the video podcast with. I'm joined by Dr. Karim Hammad. Karim, how are you today?
Well, thank you.
We are going to be telling a pretty cool age group story today. I think we're going to be telling the story of how a busy doctor manages to balance training and night shifts around going all the way to qualify for the Ironman 70.3 World Championships, which have only just happened. So the first thing to check in on is, have you managed to recover from the jet lag of getting back from St. George yet?
Yeah, just about. I still have the odd, if I'm not working, waking up at 10:30, feeling like it's 6 a.m. But other than that, I'm feeling okay.
That's good to hear. So tell us then, qualifying for the 70.3 championships in St. George. Let's start with that. Let's start about talking about the race itself, and let's start with, how St. George was as an experience, because the most unexpected thing from our point of view, watching it on, the Instagram reels and things that we saw from people before the race was, the first thing that blew my mind was Lucy Charles's feed, and she woke up and there's like 3 feet of snow where she was, and all of a sudden you go, okay, well there's a snow canyon during the race. It turns out it's actually snowing in St. George at the moment. So what was the weather like in the run-up event in the few days that you were there?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of goes to show that, as well prepared as you can ever be, you can never be completely prepared. And I wasn't expecting that. I thought maybe it might be a bit cold, maybe for Americans who are used to, lovely sunshine all year round. But it was cold. It was really cold. It was that kind of desert cold where the air just feels, like it's just never going to warm up.
Okay.
Even by midday, it would still stay quite cold. It was only really warming up by sort of 3-4 p.m., which was no use, obviously.
Oh, really?
To us, yeah. So that was really, and by 4 p.m., the weather was great. But it was cold.
So it was interesting looking at the pictures of people in transition on race day morning. It literally was like woolly hats and down jackets. And what was your expectation of getting into the water in temperatures like that? Because it looked like it was down near freezing, and that's what's reported. We obviously don't do triathlons in that kind of temperature over here. So what was your experience of getting ready to go in the water on race day?
Yeah, so I was really cool. I remember, and one of the problems was the shuttle buses, they're all kind of at the same time, which was ridiculously early, sort of 5 a.m. However, my age group was over an hour, maybe an hour and a half after the professionals. So that means I was, waiting for about an hour and a half, just, in my wetsuit in order to warm up, just to kind of keep warm. It's just another layer at that point.
Yeah.
In a down jacket with my swimming cap on as well, another layer. just trying to stay warm, doing the odd jog around just to keep warm. But the water itself, I was told, because I didn't have a chance to get in before, you weren't allowed on the day, and the only sort of organised swim at the area was very much earlier in the week. So I was told it was a bit warmer than the air temperature, and it was. So getting in the water itself wasn't too bad. It was still chilly. I'd guess about 15 degrees, the water.
Okay.
But the real issue was getting out of the water. That's kind of when it hit you, when you got your wetsuit off. And you're putting your helmet on and things like that, and you've stopped for a minute. Then it was really cold.
Really, really cold, hey? Okay. Did you manage to warm up at all on the bike when you got out there, or was it a case of, because there was a real thing on Instagram. There were obviously some people just racing in skin suits. Mm-hmm. There was a thing I read about Holly Lawrence having decided, she could make the 20-second gap or whatever by not putting anything extra on. And I was looking at her and thinking, man, everyone else is wearing long sleeve jackets and she's wearing like the traditional tiny little swimsuit thing she races in. And she said afterwards, she was so cold she could barely think for the first half of the bike leg. Was that your experience getting out and onto the bike?
A little bit, yeah. So my problem is basically I got out of the water, and there's so many participants that there's quite a long number that I had to remember, which was my my race number. And I was sure I was 3161. So I run to my bag and my bag's not there. And I had that panic moment where I was like, somebody's taken my bag. So I run over to an official and I'm shouting at the official. Well, not shouting at him, but I'm panicked. Someone's taken my bag. He comes, what number are you? 3161. So we're both looking for my bag everywhere. It's not there. He asked to see my little wristband, which has got the number on. So I show him the wristband. He's like, no, you're 3616. So I'm like, oh, right, okay. So I finally find my bag. I probably wasted a couple of minutes there. And because of that, I'm already in a panic to be quick. So my previous plan had been to put arm warmers and gloves. My arm warmers that I've got are kind of a bit fleecy on the inside, so that they do really keep you warm, those arm warmers. And I'm the kind of person that if my arms are warm, I feel generally warm. I think because, they're out in front of me as well. So I started putting the arm warmers on, but I was just in such a rush after this little delay that I just thought, you know what, I'm not going to bother. I'm going to be fine. I threw them down, put the gloves on, and just set off. And it was a bit of a Holly Lawrence because I was freezing for about 5 to 10 minutes. But I think I was a bit more fortunate than her because my race obviously started a bit later than hers. So, about half an hour into the bike, I think the temperature was a couple of degrees warmer. And I started warming up okay. So it wasn't, in the end, I was quite happy with that decision.
It's super hard, isn't it, to get arm warmers over wet arms anyway at the best of times. But I think it goes to show when you get flustered and when you feel the pressure of the timing and stuff, it's so hard, or it's so easy to make a decision that you probably wouldn't make in the rational light of day to save a couple of seconds now that you end up being freezing for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know how much blood was in my brain at that point, but it was a questionable decision. And I'm just lucky. I was really lucky that I didn't get too cold. If the weather had turned a bit worse, or I didn't quite manage to warm up, that I really might have regretted that decision.
What would you do differently next time if you went again next year, or if someone else was going next year? What would you plan to do in situations like that?
I think you've just got to prepare for it. So if I was going to do another race abroad, or even really just any race, one thing I will get good at now is putting my arm warmers on. I've never once put my arm warmers on sort of in anger, in any sort of rush at all. So the first time I ever tried that was literally then during the race, because in your head you think putting arm warmers on, like, it's like socks for your arms. It's like, how hard can it be? But hard.
Yeah, no, totally. I can still remember doing a sprint race in the early days and a pool sprint and not having worn my tri-top to swim in, thinking it would maybe save me a second or whatever, trying to pull my tri-top over as I was standing by my bike, and it just getting completely stuck and rolled up, and having to ask another athlete to help roll it down. It's like, do you see he's torn between thinking, well, I'm in a race, but this poor guy's not going to get out on the bike. So yeah, it's interesting how something that's so simple that you don't even consider. It's the same with putting socks on sometimes, isn't it? If you don't practice and if you don't have them rolled a certain way, it can be really hard to get them on race day. Yeah. So the bike course itself then, from what I've seen online, because I've never been there, it's a split transition. The lake's somewhere else and you end up riding out and around and back again. What was your experience of the bike course like?
So it's a beautiful course, really, really beautiful. The scenery is amazing. It's, everybody says that it, when they go to Kona, they can be underwhelmed by riding on a motorway. So it's definitely not that. You're not just riding on a motorway. You're riding sort of through canyons, beautiful views everywhere. I mean, I would say that you enjoy the views more on the practice rides than you do on the day. But yeah, in that sense, it's lovely. It's a hilly course, so you're either going up or down. There's very, very little flat, I would say. It's all up or down. It's quite gradual, so there's no climbs where I, felt like, I'm in danger of having to get off here or go above, way above the power that I'm sort of willing to go. But it is all up or down. Okay.
So it's a very scenic course, but people need to prepare for the fact that it's exceptionally hilly.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you feel on the bike?
Yeah. So going into the race, I'd had a little niggle in my back that basically it would rear its head usually after about an hour of riding. But it had felt like it had been better the last few weeks. And I did a practice ride and sort of a practice brick session where I tried to simulate the course as much as possible. And it was okay for that. So I was hoping that it would be fine. I think just the up and down nature of the bike meant that I'd go from, being stretched out in aero to stood up to stretched out in aero, very, very, very often. So that really set it off. And about an hour and a half in, up until that point, I'd been, perfectly sort of going to my power targets, and I was really happy with it. Then it just completely, I felt this popping feeling in my back as I was climbing out the saddle, and I was in trouble then. For a second, I was thinking, oh no, is my race over? Am I going to have to pull over? But I desperately wanted that medal, and I really, really didn't want to pull out of the race. So I just really eased on the power, and that was fine. I think I would have been okay on any other course, but because it was the that hilly course where most of the climbing comes at 70 or 75 kilometers in, something called Snow Canyon, and it's a big ascent up to the peak, which is about 1,000 meters of elevation, and that was a big problem. So I ended up basically having to pedal with one leg going up, and I really I think I lost quite a lot of time trying to get up that hill. But the benefit of it was, first of all, then I had a big descent down, which was quite scary. That I like to think of myself as quite a brave descender, but I was really on the edge there. I was, I managed to stay in aero, but I was getting to speeds of 70 kilometers an hour, which in aero in the crosswinds, with a disc wheel and other participants on the course was quite scary, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I got to the end of the bike feeling really fresh. One thing I knew is that I definitely didn't exceed my power limit for a good run.
It's pretty hard to have to do a big epic climb like that with only one leg really able to contribute to the climbing, isn't it? It's less than ideal in the middle of a world championships, I guess.
Yeah, and it wasn't even just the physical aspect; it was as well demoralizing because I've passed quite a lot of people on the bike up until that point, and then you see all these people who you've been passing coming back. Something that usually is my strength as quite a light athlete. Usually the hills, I really look forward to being able to pull some places back on the big, strong athletes who can, do 250 watts for days. So, it's nice but yeah, so that was a bit demoralizing. But, I was happy just to be able to finish the race at that point.
Yeah, cool. So you managed to get yourself to T2, and how did you feel then? Were you even confident you'd be able to run at this point, or was it just a case of seeing how things felt?
So before I started running, I was confident because basically this injury that I've had it's never shown itself on the run. I've always been able to run completely fine. So I thought, oh, that'll be okay. One of the only issues was the practice course that I kind of drew myself up at home, which is the hilliest course I can find locally. The only problem is at home, it starts with the descent. So it starts with about 3 kilometers of descending and then goes to the big hill. Whereas this course is 5 kilometers straight uphill as soon as you get off the bike, and then 5 kilometers back, and then 5 kilometers straight uphill again, and then 5 kilometers back. So where I'm used to running downhill off the bike, now I'm running uphill. And my aim had been to run about 4 minutes 40 per kilometer up the hills, and then about 4 minutes down the hills. So I started, and I was, well within my target. If anything, I was a bit faster than my target. But I did feel terrible. But I think that was, like, looking back to it now, that's just a reasonable amount of terrible to feel running up a hill as quick as you can. So yeah. I actually felt okay, and then as soon as I turned around to run down the hill, I felt absolutely great.
So the benefit of having to hold back on the bike really paid you back onto the run in terms of feeling fresh.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, so not even in terms of time, but certainly in terms of enjoyment. So I was saying earlier to you that basically, if I had gained even an extra 10 minutes on the bike, overall my position barely would have changed. Where I would have come out of, let's say, the 3,000 people, I barely would have gained 50 50 places, 100 places. I think part of that is that the World Championships is so stacked towards the ridiculously fast people that, it wouldn't have done, much difference at all. However, I actually got to enjoy the race so much. I've never ran with such a smile on my face. So yeah, I was really, really happy with that.
And was your perception on the run of running faster than the people who were around you coming off the bike? Is that part of what sort of added to the enjoyment of it?
Oh, I thought I was going to win the race, to be honest, Rob. Down the hill, I was probably running 4 minutes to 4:10 per kilometer, but in my head I was running, sub 3. I was just because it's one of those courses where a lot of people blow up on the bike, a lot of people blow up on the run. So there's so many people who are walking, crawling it at that stage, going nowhere really, especially up the hills, and even down the hills, because that can be quite a lot on the quads, and some people will be completely cramped up and still have another 4 kilometers of downhill straight to go. So I passed a lot of people on that run, which is really nice.
Yeah. Do it's an interesting reflection, that, isn't it, that you were almost forced, well, you were forced into the position of massively under biking compared to what you trained for. And then the trade-off of that is you get to experience what running feels like off the bike if you're a bit under not the power target, but almost the power limit. And I think there's a mental temptation to think, okay, I'm going to bike right to the limit of what I think I can do and then try and sort of hang on the run. It's a very different experience running for an hour and a half, feeling fantastic when everyone else is falling apart, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of the things that I felt like I barely had been able to put any power out on the bike. But when I look back at it on Training Peaks, because I ride to power, my normalized power was only 10 or 12 watts below my target in the end. So it wasn't even anywhere near what I was expecting it to be. And part of that is, sort of going up and down hill. Your average power whilst you're there is constantly a bit lower because, you think that, let's say you're going down a descent and now your average power is down to 100 and whatever because you've not
you just can't put the power out going down.
When I looked at the normalized power that kind of corrects for that, it was actually not that much less than what I was intended to do. So really, if I hadn't had that injury, I wonder if I'd have ended up over biking and
Yeah, I think it's a very common thing, especially in a big event, in an A race, in a World Championships. Everybody is trying to be right on the very limit, and it's been really interesting for me to listen to your explanation of how it felt running, because as a coach, that's what you want your athletes to experience. But I think as an athlete, especially as a triathlete, we want to get the best performance we can out of our bike leg sometimes, and kind of convince ourselves that that's going to not play such a big part in the run. Mm-hmm. I almost always think that the answer to I didn't feel great on the run, boss, was, well, you probably overbiked then, even if it didn't feel like it. Mm-hmm. And it's so great to hear you experience such a really positive run at the end of all this, because it basically made your World Championships, didn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's, I'm not here to win, to win money, prize money or whatever, so really the important thing is how it feels. And it's a lot more fun to race. I've raced a lot of races. I was saying, in fact, the race that I qualified for the World Champs, I basically did the opposite. I wasn't in the best run form. So I said, I'm going to swim and bike and make sure those two are good. And then I'll see what I can do. And I felt better at the end of the run at the World Champs than I did at the beginning of the run for this. I ran like 20 minutes faster. So, and that was a pretty flat course. It's in Poland that I did the qualification. So it was just a completely different experience. My previous race, I was hanging on from 3-4 kilometers in. Straight away, I was walking the aid stations because I was in, survival mode. I didn't have any paces in mind during the qualification race. I was just happy if I don't walk in between aid stations. That was my deal with myself, is just don't walk in between aid stations. And when you're in sort of survival mode like that, you're just not going to enjoy the race. You're spending a lot of money and time training for this race, and then you do something and you spend a few hours just suffering, then it's not as fun as if you manage to just stay within your limits and kind of actually race the whole thing.
But you know what, the contrast of your experience here is interesting, because I remember your bike leg at Poland being the experience of being in with some really quick guys. Do you remember? And you were saying, yeah, we were all absolutely racing each other on the bike.
Yeah.
And that was okay, because that was your aim, to make the most of the swim and bike that day. Isn't it interesting the difference that underbiking makes to both your experience, but also to the run split? The fact that it's 20 minutes faster on the run on a course like St. George. We've got to think you would have run 1:25 probably on a flat course on the same day, in the same sort of shape at St. George. So, I mean, 20 minutes is a massive difference to give up on the bike, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I could have, if it was so as well, the bike's very hilly. So I think if it had been a flat race, even doing the exact same power that I did, I don't think I would have given 20 minutes on the bike compared to a different flat course. I think maybe 5. So I think it was definitely the way forward. But I think
that's experience you want to have in future, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Running faster relative.
Yeah,
to
it took doing that, half marathon of just pure suffering to say, no, that's it. I'm dropping. I don't care what it's. Part of it was I never really wanted to do a bike with average under 200 watts, because I look at other people, and especially on Instagram and on everything, if you ever go on Zwift, and the power that people are putting out is just so much, and I'm quite a light athlete, but even so, I was thinking, right, I'm gonna have to put out 200 watts. It would be embarrassing to not do that. But to be honest, I go quite fast with 180, and that was my target at this point, is that my position has improved a lot, and at the end of the day, I realize you can't pick a number based off of how much you like the number. You have to kind of start low and go, and when I first started with you and I was barely a year into triathlon, my target watts for these races was 200. I've become a much better biker over long distance, especially on the TT bikes, and now I'm aiming for 180. I think that I'm being a lot more sensible these days.
I think the thing that you speak to there is, it's like the great unspoken dirty secret of triathlon, isn't it? I think everybody looks at the numbers other people are posting and wants to be, whatever it is, pick a round number, whether it's, if you're at 175, you want to be doing 180. If you're doing 180, you want to be doing 200 or 300 or whatever that is. And I remember a really, the best example of this for me was working with Matt Bottrell, and he was telling me how he had exactly the same feelings as when he was going in to race the National 25. He knew the numbers that Wiggins had put out when he'd set the British Championship. And he was sort of saying, it's embarrassing to not have that same sort of power. So even a guy like that is comparing his numbers to, but his thing was, it doesn't matter what the raw number is if you can go fast for it. And that's ultimately what we're measured on, isn't it? It's how fast we go, not how much power we put out.
Exactly. That's why sometimes I do wonder if it'd just be better to not even race to power. Obviously I have to, because I massively bike if I don't. But not in that sense, just in the sense that I think I don't know if, first of all, if I believe everyone, because when I'm doing 170, 180 watts, and my fellow competitors are, average 260 watts of that, and I look at our times and they're the same, I think there's something not right here. Either everyone picks some special power meters and mine's rubbish, but I mean I've used different ones. I've looked for that special power meter, it doesn't exist. So
I think the answer, mate, is you're incredibly slippery. I think like I said to you, the listeners won't know this, but I was driving for a day out with my son, and you came the other way with your brother in your last race sim ride, just completely randomly. And as we went by, both my son and my partner both said, look how fast that guy looks. You're this tiny little aerodynamic shape tucked in on your Canyon bike. So it's all down to, your aerodynamics,
I
isn't it?
Just riding quick is, Yeah, you just need to forget about the power. Exactly. I think sometimes where I'm even more focused on the power, you end up being less aero because you're more, sort of rocky. You're out a bit further up trying to push the power down. Whereas if you just think, I just want to ride quick, I just want to get on my bike and ride it, then you don't really think about those things. But yeah.
Yeah. Man, I think it's a massive thing for people listening as well. If we do an FTP test and the point is we're doing it in the aero position, there's nothing to be gained by sitting up to try and squeeze an extra 10 or 20 watts out. Yeah. I know people are going to be able to do that. I know people are going to be able to put more power out sitting up, but the point is practicing being in that position so that you get accurate numbers.
That's actually the biggest thing that changed my biking. So just a little bit of context is that when my first race, my bike was over 3 hours 20 or something, my first ever triathlon. And my power, so then even when my power got quite good, in fact, there was a time where my FTP was around 270 watts, which was for me for about 4.6 or 4.7 watts per kilo, I think, something like that. And the difference was I was quite early in training with you. And if you gave me a hard workout, anything with FTP, written in it, if that's session, sweet spot, whatever, well, I wouldn't be going near my TT bike. The road bike would be straight on the turbo. I'll be stood up out the saddle, 20 minutes of power. I'll give you 300 watts one way or another. That's how I felt. And then, the problem with that is I'd set an FTP, super high. And then I'd get to my workout and I wouldn't be able to complete them in aero, I wouldn't even be able to go anywhere near completing them in aero. So that meant that now I'm forced to do all my training on the road bike. Otherwise, it's just a DNF. I literally cannot do it. So I was doing a lot of my stuff. And I think that the professionals, a lot of people will look at the professionals and see them riding their road bikes loads. And that's okay for them because I think they spend like 20 hours a week just on the bike. And they'll do 5 of them in aero and then the other 15, on the road bike, gravel bike, whatever. Whereas if I'm only doing 5 hours a week on the bike, then, they better well be in aero. Otherwise, I'm just going to have no. So it got to the stage where finally I caved into you and I did an FTP test in aero. And literally not 1 month ago, my FTP on the road bike was 270. I did one in aero and it was just over 200. So it's like a 70 watt decrease. And I was, all out, like rocking, terrible form. And from then on, I was like, okay, that's it. Every single workout is in aero, every single one. And to begin with, it was, I couldn't even stay in aero. I'd have to do 1 minute aero, 1 minute off, or, sometimes even like 5 minutes aero, half an hour break, 5 minutes aero. And it just got slowly better and better. And, my position was good when I was in aero. Actually, it wasn't comfortable still for me. I wasn't used to it. Now it's the opposite. So now I'm in aero, even though my FTP is still a lot lower than it was on the road bike. It gradually increased and increased up to about, I think, around 240, 250. But the biggest difference was I was comfortable, and that meant that I would be able to actually stay in aero for the race. And previous, I was able to stay in aero mostly during the races, but it was at a cost. It was really uncomfortable. It was mentally taxing just to stay in aero, and it was physically taxing as well. I couldn't put down power. It made a big difference. So. That if I could give advice to anyone listening, if you're doing 5 hours of biking a week and you want to be good on your aero bike, whatever position you're going to be in when you're racing, you have to practice it. Your easy rides, your threshold sessions, you just have to put the time in. It's not pleasurable, especially to begin with. And the advice you gave me at the time was just have breaks and try and slowly extend the amount that I'm in aero. And made a huge difference.
I think you're doing everybody a great service by talking about this because it's, like I said, it's the great unspoken dirty secret, isn't it? If you can commit to doing a test to find out where you are in the aero position and then gradually increasing it, things will gradually get better. And if nothing changes, nothing's going to change.
But it's funny, I used to almost be embarrassed about like the watts that I was doing for a race. I'd go and do a pretty good race. And with a pretty good bike time, and thoughts would cross my head like hiding my power on Strava and things like that, where I think, everyone thinks I'm a strong biker because I did a good time, but look at my watts, it's 50, 60, 70 less than, this guy or less than that guy. But we're not always racing on Zwift. It doesn't matter. Like watts is irrelevant really. And even so, it's not really about that. That's the whole point of triathlon, I think, is that you're not trying to just achieve a good bike race, and certainly not something that looks good on Strava.
Yeah, I get it. I'm exactly the same as you. I'm someone who could always go faster for lower watts than it seemed other people could. And whenever we did anything on Zwift, I'd get killed, and I'd be 2 or 3 groups down, and where I'd be riding in the outside world, and I'm thinking, this can't be right. I can ride with these guys outdoors, but I suppose it's better to be that way. It's better to be faster for the power that you have than slower for having 350 watts at threshold, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about your background, your day job, and how you balance being a triathlete around being a doctor, because some of the most impressive things I've seen you do have actually not been physical feats of training or racing, but just dealing with the tiredness and fatigue from the amount of night shifts you've had. So talk to us a little bit about your job over the last couple of years.
Well, if it's all right with you, I'll start a little bit earlier, because I think it's in the story a little bit of just how I got into running. So it'll make sense in a second. Bear with me, Rob. So I kind of owe that to my big brother. So he's 5 years older than me. And when I was really young, maybe 11 years old or something, so he would have been 16, 17 at the time. I just loved hanging out with him. He was, anything that he would do, if I could join him, I was down for it. And one day he came to me, "Oh, do you want to go for a run?" And he'd recently gotten into running. So I was like, yeah, go with my big brother, go running. That's yeah, definitely, yeah. And so we set off, and I think he did like a 7 or 8 kilometers. And I remember I was dying for the whole thing. I was absolutely, all out just to stay with him. But because, he's my big brother, I didn't want to say anything. I didn't say a single word, didn't ask to slow down, nothing. I just survived it. And then the next day he'd come be like, "Oh, do you want to go for a run?" And I was like, yeah. And pretty much the same thing happened. And really just since then, probably my only time, I'd say I'm a reasonably good runner, sort of without too much effort, but certainly not talented on the bike or the swim. That was all like, I really had to work for any gains that I've got in either of those. But the one talent that I've always had really since those days was just being able to push myself, and that's sort of mentally and physically. When other people say they've put in a full max effort, and then I look at them and they look all right. To me, in my head, I'm like, it doesn't look like a max effort to me. When I'm putting max effort, my heart rate is at its max. I'm actually literally dying. Like the only way that I will stop is if I'm physically cramp or die or something. So I've always been good at that. It's probably since those days. And when I always wanted to be a doctor, and I joined medical school thinking that, I wouldn't have time really to do much. And I was kind of from a football background, but, and I didn't really have time to do much training, but I kind of got into marathon running just for fun. I thought, I'll sign up for a half marathon. Didn't train for it. I did it, enjoyed it. I think I did it in a 1:30 or 1:31. So, it wasn't too bad. So I was like quite generally fit. I did basically the same with a marathon. And I got to my 4th year of medical school and I was like, I want to do triathlon. And medical school's busy, but I think in a way, compared to being a doctor, there's a lot less of the mental stress, and you do get a lot more free time. So during my 4th year of medical school, although at this point I couldn't swim, so that was one barrier that I'll go into maybe a bit later, I signed up to do a half Ironman, and my brother had done one a few months earlier, or a year earlier. So that was kind of my inspiration for it. I thought, that looked really fun. He's the kind of guy that makes everything look really fun. So I was just like, I better give that a go. So I signed up for it. And I had enough time to train. I would do basically what I did was I was the classic weekend warrior. I'd do a huge session on a Saturday. And at the time it was still the idea of doing something crazy was motivating me. On a Saturday, I'd be cycling for 3 hours and then running for 2 hours. That was so crazy that it just really motivated me. And, that was fine in itself. And I managed to get to the race, and I completed the half Ironman, which was my only target. And it was in just over 6 hours that I completed it. But it was a hilly course of Marbella. And at the time, I really thought that I could do much better. I was always very ambitious. So I thought, when I was racing, there were people flying past me looking like robots or like some sort of aliens with these, fancy helmet. I was just on a road bike. They're in these fancy helmets, these weird positions. And I thought, yeah, I'll do that. That looks fun. So, right then it was my goal to, okay, I'm going to get good at triathlon. And as with anything, I got, quite quickly much better. But then it really plateaued, and particularly plateaued when I started working. So this was during the COVID pandemic. So I'm about 3 years now into being a doctor. So when I started, it's just kind of when the COVID pandemic was kicking off. So there was a lot of tough shifts at the time, and pretty much it took training myself into a hole to realize that actually I'm not doing this well by myself now. And the problem was I would be working as a doctor, especially at the beginning. It's very stressful because, I don't want to say you don't know what you're doing, but certainly you don't have that control over your day that you do in some other jobs. You might go in and have a great day. You might go in and have a terrible day. You might get yelled at. You might get, you might do something really good. You might watch somebody die. You don't have any control over the sort of mental and physical stress of the day. And that's not to mention the really difficult rotas that we start on in particular, where, you go straight from university to doing, there was times where I was doing really, really long weeks where, I'd be on course. So that would be a 12-hour shift for, let's say, 4 of the 7 days, and then working on the weekend too. So, of those days, I'd only have 1 day where I'm actually off. So yeah. I knew that day I'll probably be exhausted anyway. But the thing is if, let's say, I missed a session because I was just too exhausted to go out, because I've always had that ability to just really push myself, I ended up doing some really, midnight 2-hour runs, or like an all-out effort to get a session done that I had planned to do. And even more than that, sometimes in my head, I would do a really hard session and I would think, that's all I could give. And then that would scare me. I think, yeah, but my race is longer than 10 kilometers. So that can't be all I can give. And then I'd have to do another 10 kilometers just to prove to myself that I'd be able to do, longer. Anyways, kind of the end product of that. So I remember I was just outside one of the wards. And I don't know how I came across you, Rob, but basically I saw some sort of advert or some sort of maybe on Instagram or Training Peaks or something. I was just like, and it was particularly the fact that you're interested in people with, busy lives who can't always, tick off every session or can't always dedicate 20 hours a week or whatever some people manage. So I gave you a ring, and I was actually, you don't know this, but you rang me back. So, that's it. I booked a calling slot, and you rang me. But so, yeah, actually, one of the things I didn't realize at the time, but I think that so I think I rang you outside of the award, and you answered, and you basically, I gave you my story, and you really nicely kind of put it to me that, you're not alone. This is a completely normal thing that you're feeling. Like, it is difficult to manage to do this all by yourself. So I started training with you. And one of the biggest differences in the training with you that's really important if you're doing any sort of busy lifestyle, particularly as a doctor, is that missed sessions and things like that, where you're too exhausted to do, or you've had to stay in late at work or whatever, even if you're just not feeling well, rather than doing a big hero session to make up for it the next day, you would just say to me, right, you've missed that, just move on. It doesn't matter. One session is not gonna, make or break you. Look back at your training, you've done this, just move on. You will do better now to just recover if you're feeling so tired that you can't do this session, then that means you definitely need to recover, not that you definitely need to do more. And that was probably the biggest difference, really. And it made a lot of guilt-free training rather than that kind of over-under training that I was doing previous.
Yeah, it's funny. Before the call, I was looking back over some of our notes that I've made over the years, and I could kind of see the evolution of you from the person you were then to the person that you are now, and thinking, wow, I'd forgotten you were ever like this. I'd forgotten there were I went out and did a 2-hour run at midnight. I'd forgotten that there was instead of doing the e-pace run, I decided to do a 10K time trial to see where I was at. And it's such a, you're not alone. It's such a common thing that people think, well, if I'm going to do the race, I have to do this in training. It was so hard for you to balance what you wanted to do in athletics around what you had to do around the work, with the 4 on call 12-hour shifts in a row, the night shift blocks you would get. That's the thing that always got me. I don't know how any human survives what doctors have to go through when you have a block of 3 night shifts where you don't see the sun, and then you want to train when you get out because that's your life.
The night shifts, for example, what I would do is I would basically, you miss a night of sleep the first night, so you're already starting one night of sleep down, because it's very difficult to sleep during the day when you've not already been doing night shifts. Okay, so you just miss a night of sleep. Then I would usually sleep 4 hours a day each night, just 4 hours, wake up around 2 p.m, get my workout done just in time to get home, have a shower, have a meal, and then go to the night shift. So every single day for 4 days in a row, I would have 4 hours sleep. And you end up basically as well, it's little things that you don't realize, like there isn't a proper canteen open or anything like that of a night shift. So pretty much for 4 days, your main meals are like those little Tesco sandwiches, and so you go through 4 days of eating rubbish on the, so there's always some like box of chocolates and stuff, so you pretty much eating chocolates for energy, and sleeping about 4 hours a day, trying to get your training done. So the night shifts in particular were the biggest struggle for me.
Yeah, really, really tough. And I remember sitting down and sort of saying, well, let's just make this really easy. Let's take all the exercise out and let's just go for a walk in the woods. And you looked at me like I was an insane person. Like, but I want to do, I want to do this World Championships next year. And it's like, but all your body can do right now. It's obvious, isn't it, now when we look back? You're not eating, you're not sleeping. You've got an incredibly stressful job for 12 hours where people's lives are in your hand. Probably the best thing to do with the limited time you've got is not to go to the track and absolutely hammer yourself with a session of 1K reps around the running track or whatever. But it's so hard to move away from the, I've seen Lionel Sanders do this on Instagram or whatever. Yeah, you did really well to get through that phase and just survive, let alone survive with any kind of fitness.
Yeah. No, I think part of it as well is, ideally into any race, you'll put, you'll put great weeks of work where, you manage to tick off all you said. That's obviously ideal. I think the hard bit is to admit when you can't do that, and to admit that the next best thing is at least to not sort of put yourself in a hole. And the worst thing is to try and do the workouts when you can't recover from them. It's I think that's the hardest bit. The hardest bit for me was to admit, hold on, I can't do the training and recover. Yeah.
And I think that's so massive. It's such a mature realization to go, okay, I'm going to do everything that I can, but I'm not going to do more than I can recover from. And when you get that in place, all of a sudden, everything works in synergy. Yeah, really cool, man. That's awesome. Tell us about Gaza. Tell us about your trip out to Gaza.
Yeah, so I work for a charity in Liverpool that goes to war-torn areas to do renal transplant, kidney transplants. So one of the places they go is the Gaza Strip in the Middle East. And this area, it's really small, but really, really densely populated. It's got over 2 million people in it, and it's about the size of the world if you're from up north. And basically, there's a lot of people there with kidney failure, but it's mostly young people. The average age is about 17, actually.
Really?
Yeah. But the problem is first of all, it's a very sort of poor area where things are controlled going in and out. So they don't have very good infrastructure there, and the dialysis there, even in the UK or in a developing country, if you're on dialysis, it greatly shortens your life expectancy, unfortunately, if you have kidney failure. And the only real sort of the gold standard best treatment is a kidney transplant. But in war-torn areas, when a war breaks out, it's really difficult to get to the hospital for dialysis. An example of that is in I think it was 2008. There was a war in Gaza, and half of the half of the kidney failure patients died just because they couldn't reach the dialysis in time because of obviously wars going on. So we go and we do kidney transplant. So it's a consultant surgeon from the Royal Liverpool Hospital, and over the last 10 years, we've done over 100 kidney transplants there. And the goal is to set up a kidney transplant unit there run by the people of Gaza. So, we're training them up and things like that. And I was lucky enough even to go this year in February. I went most recently. And it's really sort of fulfilling work. You go there for a couple of weeks, and I help out as with the surgeries as well as it's just a very rewarding work. But yeah, it was an interesting conversation with you when I I let you know. Sorry, I'm gonna struggle a bit with the swimming in particular. I think it'll just be running. Really all I could do that week was I went for a morning run around the Gaza Strip like 7 a.m. every morning. And I don't think running is very popular in Gaza at the moment because everyone was looking at me like I was crazy. I think they've got bigger things to worry about than running for fun in Gaza at the moment.
Yeah,
but
wow.
But yeah, that's one thing I'm really passionate about. So just to mention the charity name, it's the Liverpool International Transplant Initiative. If you're interested, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes on both the podcast and YouTube as well. We'll make sure we get that in there for sure. And listen, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about and to highlight was really the challenge of Ramadan around triathlon training. So talk to us about what the impact of that is on your daily life and especially the impact on you as a triathlete.
Yeah, I mean, huge. So as a Muslim, we do a month of fasting where basically for that month we don't eat nor drink, so including water, from sunrise to sunset. At the moment, Ramadan's falling in the summer as well, so it's really long. Usually, it's from about 3 a.m, so until around 8 p.m, 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Now, another big challenge as well is sleep. So that means I have to wake up very early and try and stuff some food down at 3 a.m. As you'd imagine, that does not help with sleep. trying to go back to sleep feeling like you're about to pop, because you've just drank about 2 gallons of water because you got training. Now the thing is, as you probably heard from this podcast, like, for me, when I start Ramadan, it's not an option to not train for a month. So I always really want to figure out how I can still manage to train despite, without the water and the food. And it's still a work in progress because really you've got a couple of options. You can either do it early on whilst you're topped up in water and food, but then the problem is you're a bit of a zombie for the rest of the day because you've kind of used your energy requirements already. And when you're going into work and you've got other people's lives at your hands, you can't really be not on your A game. So that wasn't really much of an option for me. So the option that I usually did was just before I could eat, so around 6 p.m, something like that, whilst you are feeling kind of at your worst at that point, but go and do your workout then, and at least as soon as you're back, you can have your food and your water and kind of replenish. But I think one of the biggest things was knowing your limits again. So I did it so you don't have to, is I found out what the limits are, and all long workouts were just gone. I had a time limit 1 hour, and anything I could do. I could do some hard workouts. I could put in some quality, knowing that I could eat and drink as soon as I was done. But there was no way you could do something like a 2-hour, 3-hour workout. So it's just about trying to keep things ticking over, realize that, the whole point of Ramadan, it's supposed to be quite a spiritual month where you kind of introspect, think about the things, in your life that are going good and be thankful for them, give more to charity, and just try and be a bit of a better person in general. And, I think it's the point of the month is to not really focus too much on other things like your FTP or your, things like that. And I do think it's helpful. It's nice to have a month where you just put, other things in your life first. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That the realization that it brings on like a spiritual level is very different to the sort of the way I approached it, which was like, okay, well, there's a physical challenge here, and we can't be training hard at this, and you can't eat and drink here and there. But that reflection of the gratitude it brought you to be able to do it at all, I think that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I lost a lot of weight. That's the one thing I would say, because you really struggle to get more than one proper meal in. As a month goes on, I think, your stomach tolerance gets lower and lower as you get used to just being hungry. First few days are always really difficult, and then you kind of just get into a pattern where you get used to it. And for me, I lost about 5 kilos over the month of Ramadan, which, and probably the physiological effect on your metabolism as well, where your body goes from, expending energy during workouts to just doing anything it can to keep hold of energy for you. So, really slows down your metabolism. So you do have a bit of a sort of bounce back after Ramadan where, you can gain weight quite easily if you're not careful afterwards.
Yeah. It's very interesting that the idea of it becomes more spiritual, it becomes more of a reflective thing. That's very interesting and challenging time in different ways, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so last question then. What do you see the future holding for you in terms of life, career, and triathlon, multi-sport choices?
Yeah, so life career wise, so my plan is to do surgical, basically, become a surgeon. So the problem is that's, not very conducive with triathlon. So I think it's about kind of picking your battles. So for example, I've had quite a nice part of my career now where I've been able to just take a few less shifts. And that's really sort of nicely coincided with doing the World Champs. And, I felt like I was able to train quite well for them. I've got a busy few months coming up, and, because it's over the winter as well, my next race is the Sprint World Championship Duathlon over in Spain, in Ibiza, in April. So that'll help me kind of, I'll be able to just do shorter workouts, just kind of more fun stuff, and try and get a bit of speed back in slow legs. So that's my plan at the moment. But I do intend on going back to triathlon, because one of the things I've struggled with the most is putting a good race together. I've still not had one of those races where I feel like all three have gone well, particularly the bike and the run. I feel like, I finally got my run back on track, but unfortunately had this little injury, which meant a slow bike. So I really think there's some work left there. So I will hopefully go back to the long distance.
That's the thing that's tempting you back, is it? The idea of putting them all together on one day.
Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. I think it's the thing that keeps us all coming back.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. I don't know if it's possible, but it's because I think everyone always goes away thinking there's something they could have done better. But I just want to put out a race where I think everything's gone pretty well.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, well, look, I think you did a brilliant job in St. George, managing all the various challenges you had along the way, and to manage yourself through the back pain in the race and have a really good run. More than anything, I'm just really glad that you you enjoyed it so much, the way you described enjoying the run and going past the crowds and all of that on race day.
Yeah,
I think that's the big
just
win.
if I could mention, because you know, my girlfriend who came with me as well, I'll just give a shout out to her because she was on one of the corners, and every time I saw her, as also another huge you know, morale boost, kept me running, kept me going during that race.
What's your girlfriend's name?
Enrica.
Oh, there you go. You see, you get a name check as well, Enrica. All right, brilliant. Listen, Karim, thank you very much for spending the time with us and sharing your story. It's been fascinating to hear about how you've balanced the life of a busy doctor and trainee surgeon with qualifying for the 70.3 World Championships.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Cheers, Karim.
Cheers.